and thank you for joining our Wish London webinar. And my name is Hani Premlal. I'm one of the Wish London board members. I'm also working as the Director of Customer Homes and Tenancy Services for BCHA. And Maria Moriarty, and I'm the host for this afternoon. So if you're not familiar with Wish networking, we are a networking community for women working in social housing, both in public and private sector. So if you haven't got a membership, please put your details in the chat box. We can get your membership on. And thanks once again for coming to this session. For a few housekeeping rules, if you're not talking, please mute yourself. And the event will be recorded, and we welcome all the questions from the audience, and please post it on the chat box. So today we're going to talk about diversity. I'm really happy to see that good member of representation from across the sector today. So obviously diversity is such an important topic, and I can understand you're here for that reason as well. For me, my journey to housing was not a straightforward one. I came from India after my master's in biochemistry and my marriage as well. So the last 26 years been working in social housing, in a different environment. It was a complete challenge. So I'm not going to say too much about me, because we have fantastic panel speakers here who would like to share their stories, and today we're going to talk about how we can all work together and make an inclusive environment for everyone. And this small actions or even behaviors can change how we can operate in an inclusive environment. So as a equality and diversity lead at BCHA, I'm working with our board members and customers and my colleagues to make a more inclusive workplace for BCHA. So please join me welcoming our fantastic panel speakers. We have an apologies from Sandra Skate. She's the CEO for Octavia Housing. Unfortunately, she couldn't join due to unforeseen circumstances. So I would like to welcome our next speaker, Kate Henderson. Kate is well known to the sector. She's the CEO for National Housing Federation and the voice of housing associations. And Kate is passionate about tackling housing crisis, inequality, and climate change. And our next speaker again, Eileen Evans. Eileen also well known to the sector. She's the CEO for Grand Union Housing Group and currently the president of Chart Institute of Housing. She's an emerging mental health campaigner. You heard lots about her talking about mental health, and she's fundraising target of 50K support Mind this year. Such a great project. Finally, our speaker is Helen Gregg. She's an experienced manager in the housing sector, and she is our MD of Women in Social Housing since December 2020. So I would like to welcome all of you, and I would like to welcome our next sponsor for this event, which is Wingfoot Sherwood. I welcome Shelley Gromley to say a few words next. Thank you, Shelley.
Thanks very much, and hello everyone. Thank you so much for having us and giving Wingfoot Sherwood the opportunity to sponsor the events. By way of an introduction, my name is Shelley Gormley and I'm an associate at Wingfoot Sherwood, and I'm also a member of the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion group at our firm. As a firm, we consider ourselves to be diverse and inclusive, but we also recognise that we're at the beginning of our journey of raising awareness of equality, diversity and inclusion issues, and there's much more that we can do as a firm. Our firm's EDI group came together organically. We're a group of individuals all representing something different. And what we're hoping to do is we're working towards ensuring that our firm continues a culture and community where everyone within the firm and everyone that we work with feels valued, included and heard. We really do believe that a real change can only come about by listening to each other's experiences and acknowledging them. So we really are delighted to be sponsoring this event, which provides a platform which does just this. I'd like to share with you a couple of steps that we've taken as a firm. Firstly, our firm's Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Group has created what we call an internal awareness calendar, which details various dates which are celebrated and acknowledged from different communities and religions. And this has received really positive feedback from our colleagues, and it really does show that simple steps can have quite a profound educational impact on people. Secondly, our partners have engaged with an external consultant who's really well known within the sector, who can help us as a firm understand and increase our awareness of what equality, diversity and inclusion involves and what it means. Furthermore, we've also made changes to our recruitment process to try and break the mould of what is perceived to be a good CV, and what we're trying to do is delve deeper into different backgrounds of our applicants so that we get a broader range of people joining us. As part of this, we're also embarking on initiatives such as Upreach, Aspiring Solicitors and Pathway to Law. What we're trying to do is help open that door and provide opportunities to underrepresented groups in the legal profession. So we're embarking this journey with full commitment. Our managing partners on board, our partnership are very much on board. And we're really excited to see the developments we can make as a whole to ensure that we're embedding within our working culture that equality, diversity and inclusion is the norm and not the exception. So my colleagues and I are very much looking forward to listening to and learning from the speakers today. And we're really grateful to all of you for sharing your views. And so just once again, thanks very much for having us. Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley, and thank you for sponsoring as well. So our first speaker today is Kate Henderson. She's the CEO of National Housing Federation. Welcome, Kate.
Hi, everybody, and it's great to be here. Firstly, massive apologies for arriving slightly late. I just had one of those horrendous technical glitches. And I am doing this on tablet rather than on my computer, but I really hope you can all see me and hear me fine. And I'm super happy to be here and to be part of this discussion. Firstly, I guess what I wanted to say is it's really important that we're having these discussions, and we must kind of continue to do so. That's hugely important. I run the National Housing Federation, and running the NHF is a huge privilege. It's also a massive responsibility. Equality, diversity and inclusion matters to all of our staff. It matters to our members and all of their staff. And it really matters to the residents that we are here to serve as a sector. This is an agenda that's important to me personally and important to the NHF, and it's something that we're really striving to demonstrate leadership on. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the work that we're doing internally at the NHF, and then some of our sector-facing work. Now, I joined the NHF a little over 2.5 years ago, and one of the first things I did when we started was to establish our staff equality, diversity and inclusion group. And that group's been a really good driving force for the organisation. Last year, we published a document called Who We Are, which is our internal EDI strategy. And that strategy has a huge amount of positivity in it, but it also showed that as an organisation, we have a long way to go. And in particular, it showed a lack of colleagues from a Black and minority ethnic background. And it also showed that we had a lack of disabled staff as well. So we're making a really concerted effort to address these discrepancies and to become a more diverse organisation and a more inclusive organisation. And we're doing that through a variety of things. Recruitment practices are a really important part of that. And we've adopted things like the Rooney Rule, and we've become a disability confident employer. We've also done a variety of other things that I think are really important to building our culture and improving our diversity. So we've done things like training for staff on different aspects of EDI. We've committed to and started reporting both internally and externally on our staff EDI data. Now we're smaller than the 250 staff number threshold for doing that reporting, but it's really important to our colleagues, and it's really important in terms of us being leaders to know our own data, however uncomfortable that is. So we've started by doing gender data. We're now in the process of doing our ethnicity pay gap as well. We've done things like made a commitment that all NHS staff should only speak on panels and at events where there are a diverse representation of speakers. And we've created diversity targets for a number of our activities. For example, the NHS runs a number of national groups, and on these national groups, we now have targets of 50% women, 20% colleagues from a Black and minority ethnic background, and really importantly, all content through those groups needs to be accessible for disabled people. And I think one of the other things that we've done is we've committed to being publicly vocal. It's really important that we use our voice, our position of sector influence to show leadership on EDI and to be in that space. And that's something that we're encouraging all staff at the Federation to do. So that's a bit about us internally. And then we have our external facing work and the work that we're doing to support the sector. So one of the things we've done is to establish an Equality, Diversity and Inclusion in Housing National Member Group. And we created this in 2019. It's a brilliant group and exists to support the social housing sector to be vibrant and diverse at all levels within the organisation. And that's about reflecting the communities in which we work, but also around growing and appointing diverse talent to improve our leadership diversity. The group itself has been great. We're just recruiting in actually, so if anybody is interested in joining the group, check out our website, applications by this Friday, I think. What that group's done for us at the Federation is to create a clear structure for how the sector can improve the diversity and inclusivity of its workforce. So we've had a number of real tangible kind of actions and outputs. So one of which is the group fed into our new code of governance, which we published last autumn, and that has a renewed focus and specific requirements on EDI, and that's about changing the culture at a board level. We've launched our insights report looking at the landscape of housing association staff across the country. And again, this is about having the data there, having a picture across the country to be able to start a conversation at all levels within housing associations. Hopefully you've seen, just last month we published a new data tool, and we've been developing this with members and the group and testing it. We've just launched it, and this is enabling housing associations to compare how diverse their workforce is with the communities they serve, and it's based on characteristics of the population in stock locations. Again, please do check this out if you haven't seen it already. It's a really important way of just starting to understand the data. Now, the data itself doesn't lead to change, but the data enables you to understand where you're at, to think about ambitious targets of where you may want to get to, and then to set out an implementation plan. The data also enables you to start having a conversation, and it's those conversations that we want to see. We've also created a library of best practice, some really good case studies on our website around things that have worked, and where you can learn from each other. And I think that that's really important as well, across a whole range of different EDI activities that our members are doing. And we're really committed to running webinars, and we're really grateful that Wish is running this one. I think going forward, what we want to see is members using our EDI tool, and then actually creating change with the results. And we're going to be asking the sector to publish their results so that we can analyse that and to make sure that we are making progress. We've just set up 2 new national groups on EDI. So one is specifically for chief executives and one is for operational leads. And again, this is around using the platforms, creating networks of learning, being visible about our commitment for change. We're going to continue to develop our collection of case studies to support change and action. So again, if you're doing anything that's fantastic, that would be a good case study, do drop us a line. We'll be providing guidance on the code of governance. So it's great having a code of governance. It's what boards, many of our members use around the board table. But we want to make sure that that code of governance drives organisational change. So making sure we put support in there. And we're also planning an EDI event later this year. Now, being an organisation that kind of has a voice across the sector, I think we're really conscious of our own events as well and how we make sure that they promote equality, diversity and inclusion. So we're now setting targets for all of our panels at NHF events and conferences. And again, 50% women, that is not hard to achieve. 20% colleagues from a Black and minority ethnic background, making sure our content and our venues are accessible. These are things we should all be doing, and we're absolutely committed to doing so. And we're also committing to make sure that the content about EDI is at our mainstream events as well. So yes, we want to do a special event on EDI, but it's really important that this content is available at all events. And just kind of a final word on the role that we have in the sector. Being, as I started with, being in a leadership position is a privilege, but it's a responsibility, and we have to show leadership. It's really important. So EDI now sits within our business plan, and it's a long-term organisational priority. And we know the journey to greater equality is going to require practical change and positive action to address the really substantive gaps that we have in diversity. But it's also about a wider cultural shift, and that's about us becoming a beacon of inclusivity. And that might sound a bit grand, but actually that's the environment we want this sector to be. That's how we want our residents to feel, and that's how we want our staff to feel. And the NHF's role is to lead from the front with this, to share best practice, to amplify the voice of our members and the voice of EDI experts. And we've got the capacity and the capability to bring people together and to take the sector on a journey. And I think we have to be a catalyst for change ourselves, but we also need to leverage, our ability to influence through the activities I've outlined. We also can't do this alone, and our partners and other organisations who are working on inequality in the sector are hugely valued and hugely important, such as Women in Social Housing. And I'm really delighted that Women in Social Housing are hosting today's event, and I'm really delighted to be part of today's discussion. So that's enough for me tonight. I'm going to hand over to our next speaker and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Kate, and I'll pass on to Eileen to talk about her involvement with the mental health and various other diversity factors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you. It's a great privilege to be doing the things that I'm doing, and to be given a platform to talk about these things, which are really, really important. So I want to first ask you a question. I want to ask you, when you think about somebody who has mental health challenges, what do they look like? What do you think they look like? Because if you look on Google, you will see people with their heads in their hands, and you will see people who are obviously struggling and suffering. Well, somebody who has a mental health challenge looks like me. And people across the sector know about that, but more importantly, people in Grand Union know about that, and that enables people in Grand Union to feel that if they have a mental health challenge, they belong in Grand Union, because belonging is what's important. And I'm going to talk about belonging this morning. oh, sorry, this lunchtime, forgotten what time of day it is. When George Floyd's death occurred and people started to take diversity seriously, at Grand Union we didn't rush out with a statement, because actually I didn't think that our practice and our work was good enough. And if we were going to be talking about such things, I wanted to make sure that we had substance to that. And we'd started some work previously, actually inspired by the work of the NHF and inspired by the work Kate started when she came in. And so we set about working for the last year and a bit in thinking very, very carefully about what diversity meant for Grand Union, and our colleagues at Grand Union decided that actually for them it was about belonging. So we have loads of data. We've collected all of that data. We used the NHF diversity tool the day after it was released, and what that showed us, for example, was that 18% of our colleagues were from a Black and minority ethnic background against a local population of 4%. It showed us the same issues around disability that that Kate reported, and that's something that we need to do more about. Our ethnic pay gap is negative, so the average pay for somebody from a Black and minority ethnic background is higher than from a white background. Our gender pay gap, our mean average gender pay gap is also negative. So so we've measured all the numbers, but how does that make people feel? So it has changed our behaviour, and it has led us to do things. But for me, we were really, really interested, and what we wanted to do was to create at Grand Union a place where people felt that they belonged. We feel that everybody has a right to work in an organisation where they can feel they belong. And there's some data around that. People with a high sense of belonging take 75% fewer sick days, for example. Excluded and employees who don't feel they belong have a 50% higher turnover. Employees who belong perform more effectively than employees who don't feel they belong. And so how were we going to create this feeling of belongings? We've got the data. How is it that we're going to create a feeling? So actually that's about how we work across Grand Union to create. I want Grand Union to be a place where everybody can feel that they can be themselves. And that's why I talk openly about my mental health at Grand Union and beyond. And that's why other people talk about issues that are pertinent for them, because that helps foster that sense of belonging. And so what are the practical things that we have created? Well, so for us, so when we're thinking about leading this work, actually, one of the things that we did when we were taking or getting our board's input into our new belonging strategy, I created a diversity continuum. I couldn't find one on Google, so I created a diversity continuum because actually I really wanted to gauge where our board's ambition was and the ambition of our organisation was. And it had, you know, very legally compliant down one end of the continuum, and it had actively anti-racist, allyship, actively anti-prejudice, and creating that culture of belonging. The other, our board's ambition was very, very clear, that they want us to be actively anti-racist, they want us to be diverse, they want us to and we need to get loads better at this, but they want us to provide services which reflect the diversity of the communities that we serve. So it isn't just about how we as an organisation are diverse, but how we actively seek to provide services that reflect that diversity. So what are some of the things we've done? Well, so we have a full diversity calendar, and colleagues, this might sound really small, but it's had a massive impact. Colleagues share their stories. So I'll give you an example. We have had a blog post by somebody talking about Ramadan, and in particular fasting during Ramadan. One of our internal repairs team, so one of our trades operatives, posted on there and said, "I am Christian. I had never understood how starving yourself," I'm using his words, how starving yourself creates is showing your love for God. And but now I better understand it is about appreciating the food that you have and what you have, and helping you think of others. So in that way, we are seeking to build understanding. We've had no end of people sharing stories from an LGBTQ perspective, from a transgender perspective, from a black and minority ethnic perspective, and from a disability perspective. And that has fostered a culture where people feel they can belong and be themselves. So it's about that. The other thing I think we need to do, though, is to raise awareness. One of the things that our colleagues were very concerned about is, so how do they challenge? So when they see, you know, if we've said we're going to be actively anti-racist, for example, what is the language and how do we challenge that? So if we said we're going to do that, how do we live that, and how do we make that happen? So we're about to bring in some training and support to give people that language for change, for example. Raising awareness around white entitlement and white privilege, and a range of other awareness opportunities throughout the year that that can help us be better, help us be more understanding, and help us foster a culture where people really feel that they belong. And then we are now working on the plan that does that with our customers. I hope that we can create a sense where our customers feel that Grand Union is truly a landlord where they can belong, and that their needs will be. We will work together to understand needs and provide those services. So for me, then, it's the data is great. The data has helped us set targets. The data has changed our actions. You know, 30% of our apprentice intake, because actually we need to start there. 30% of our apprentice intake is from a black and minority ethnic background, some astonishing talent. And in particular, then when we went out to recruit for a finance director, and we traditionally use agencies for that, and the first cut of finance director candidates was all white men, and I went back and said, actually, this isn't good enough. I would like a more diverse shortlist. And we have appointed a couple of years ago now, Mona Shah, who is a woman from a black and minority ethnic background. That we have, and we have that practice across Grand Union now. So for me, the data is important. The actions you take are important, but then there is also, if we are truly to achieve this, it's how do we foster and create that culture of belonging? Because before I hand over now to Helen Gregg, I'll just use this quote by one of my favourite authors, Maya Angelou. People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aileen, and I really like the word belonging, and I'd like to know a bit more about that. And pass on to Helen now, our next speaker. Welcome, Helen.
Thanks, Honey, and thanks, Kate and Aileen. That's fantastic. My section is really to talk about what the audience can do to make a difference. And I think what I'd like to add into that is myself and everyone else, because we're no different. And actually preparing for this section has been fantastic for me, because it's really helped me to examine my own practice and the things that I do, which has been really good. And some of it will of course reference back to the things that Kate and Aileen have talked about, because actually there's some really good practice going on there. But I wanted to split this bit into two sections, really. The first bit is for things that everyone can do, and the second bit is for those who've got the authority within organisations to make some of the decisions. And the reason I wanted to do that is because it's quite easy sometimes to abdicate responsibility for diversity. Say it's a management job, and absolutely there is a responsibility, like Kate referenced. With responsibility comes that, with power comes that responsibility, absolutely. But there are of course always things that we can do as well, everyone can do, and I wanted to start with those. And the first one links really strongly into Aileen's point about belonging in an organisation. It's one thing for a management team to work with a staff team to talk about this and to deliver this kind of environment, but they can't do it on their own. And actually, to create an environment where people feel like they belong depends on every single member of staff being involved with that. And I think one of the words I use quite a lot when I talk about diversity is intentionality. Welcoming feels like a very passive word to me, and I think if you look at the actions that Kate and Aileen have just been talking about, what they're talking about is that intentionality. Welcoming is passive. It's fine, it's good to be a welcoming organisation, but the intentionality is when you actively work at making your environment a comfortable place for everybody. It's not enough to be passive, but actively contribute to making it a comfortable place for everyone. If you think about the jobs where you felt comfortable, these are the ones that Aileen's referencing, with the lower sickness, the higher productivity and so on, because actually then you feel like you're really part of something. The second one is about being open if you feel comfortable to do so, and again links strongly back into that previous point. I won't go into too much detail on this one because I think Aileen's covered it brilliantly, but again I'm also somebody who's been very open about my mental health issues, and I did that because about 5-6 years ago I just recognized that the stigma wasn't going to get any better if people didn't start talking about it, and I had that ability, I had that forum where I could actually talk about it, and it worked wonders in terms of allowing people to open up the conversation with me, to talk about it, and when I did get ill, to have that ability to carry on working in a slightly different way, because people understood it and they were aware of of what I needed, and to ask me what I needed rather than just do to me, which would have made things worse. So being open about your own story is, I feel, very healthy. If you feel comfortable, you shouldn't feel pressured to do it, but if you're operating in an environment where you feel comfortable to do it, it's incredibly powerful. The next point is, we've touched on it already, but it's always holding on to the fact that diversity is a broad arena. It's not just visible differences. And actually, when we look at visible differences, not all visible differences get the same level of understanding. I've been working recently with a group called Changing Faces. People might have heard of them. And they're a group who work with physical differences, normally around the face, around scarring or disfigurements, for example. And some of the statistics they talk about are quite shocking. Around only 10% of people with a serious facial disfigurement actually work. Because it's so bad, and the research they've done is that more than a third of people with a serious facial disfigurement with any facial disfigurement will feel treated differently in an interview or in a workplace, and people will stare. And I think it's just trying to bring to the forefront that actually when we talk about diversity, it's very easy to focus that on one or two of the key areas. And of course, the big areas, gender and race, the very visible differences, maybe physical disability, are absolutely critical. They are important. But there are lots of areas of diversity. There are lots of areas of difference. And if we're going to create an environment where people genuinely feel comfortable, it's about recognizing all of those. And again, it comes back to that intentionality, actively thinking about it and actively being aware of things rather than just waiting for something to hit you in the face. And the last one I wanted to flag for everybody is about being brave. And this is really about challenging policies and practices that just don't feel right anymore. We saw this in domestic abuse when it was lumped together into an antisocial behaviour policy. And what we saw was that because domestic abuse was being treated as antisocial behaviour, the response wasn't accurate. And in the absolute worst case scenario, this resulted in somebody being murdered and a neighbour listening and recording that because they'd been told to record the noise pollution rather than treating the situation by ringing the police, which is how it should have been dealt with. And I don't know, I'm showing my age a little bit, but I don't know how many of you remember the case of Fiona Pilkington in 2007 in Leicester. Now, Fiona killed herself and her severely disabled daughter after a decade of harassment and hate crime from the neighbours, and the police didn't do anything. The Serious Case Review responded with the learnings being the importance of distinguishing between general antisocial behaviour, harassment, and hate crime. And I think that's really important. I'm just going to read it again. The importance of distinguishing between general antisocial behaviour, harassment, and hate crime. And the reason I emphasise that is because actually we're not all perfect in the housing sector, and sometimes policies and practices can be there because it's something we've always done. So what I'd say is the fourth point for everyone is to make a difference, be brave, challenge that policy, challenge that practice, even if it's written down, even if it's been written down for several years, challenge it if something doesn't sit right, if it feels like we're looking at the wrong person in a situation that's arisen. And if it doesn't feel morally right, say something, challenge it. And I think the more people who do this, the more we start the conversation about why it doesn't feel right. There are, of course, some of the things for those people who have a little bit more authority in organisations. We've talked a little bit about recruitment again, and I'd just add to that bit about being intentional. It's really straightforward to use the NHF's tool, which is fantastic. Aileen's talked about it. Do some analysis of your own organisation. And if you're not confident of your own ability to recruit from a diverse pool, and again, as Aileen mentioned, use a recruitment agency. And I thought that was a really good example that Aileen said. The recruitment agency are there to do as you ask them to do. If you're paying them to bring you non-white middle-class men, for example, that is what they absolutely have to do. And the recruitment of Mona is a perfect example of that. But you have to be intentional about it. Don't be passive about it. Don't just expect them to say so, to bring you the variety of candidates. Don't just expect them to if you say to them, we need some diversity, we need to look at it, don't expect them to know exactly what you're talking about. Be very intentional with your directions to the agencies. And I'm conscious that the issue of cost comes up quite a lot. And what I just draw people's attention to is the fact that there has now several really well-established studies by McKinsey, by Cranfield, that diversity equals profit. Diverse businesses have cash flows that are 2.3 times higher than non-diverse ones and 19% higher revenue. Please don't use the excuse that it's going to cost to get a recruitment agency to improve your diversity, because in the long term that is not an argument. And actually, sadly, we often have to come back to a financial argument with these things. It's a really strong argument to use with management teams around why it's important to improve the diversity. And of course, the last one, which Kate referenced, and is such great leadership from the National Housing Federation about panels that are non-diverse. I absolutely don't want to hide from the fact that we are now sat here today with a panel of 3 white women. Really, really aware of that. Obviously, it's out of our control in terms of Sandra not being able to come at the last minute today, but also the fact that we're a panel of all women. And this links into a point that I wanted to make around being open to challenge. Somebody challenged me recently saying that an all-female panel is just as bad as an all-male panel. And that was a really interesting challenge for me. I quite like being challenged. Obviously, it should make us think. And one of the biggest things we can do with diversity is make sure we're thinking about things rather than just letting them happen to us. And at Wish, we talk a lot about male allies, because if we're trying to improve the housing sector, for women, we need men to be on board with that too. But I love a good challenge. And what I would say to that is that all women panels are not the norm. They're not the status quo, whereas all male panels have been for decades. Each topic merits its own approach, absolutely. But I celebrate panels made up entirely of those with less power in our society, as long as there's diversity within the panel itself. Ultimately, nobody wants to listen to 3 people who agree on everything or say the same thing. But let's just be intentional in our approach to diversity, and not shy away from it, not shy away from the challenges. Be a little bit awkward sometimes to make the point, to make sure that we're getting the message across there. But just don't be guilty of not thinking enough about the topic. Really allow yourself to be challenged and challenge other people, because that's the only way we're going to make the difference. Thanks, Honey.
Thanks, Helen. So it's over to me now. If you want to, feel free to turn on your cameras again. We've got some time for questions now. I've got a couple already that have come through in the chat, but if you've got any more questions, feel free to type them in the chat. So just to introduce myself, my name is Maria and I'm on the London Wish board. I'm also the head of resident engagement and corporate experience with Network Homes Housing Association. So we've already got a couple of questions come through, and they are all actually for you, Kate. So firstly, someone wanted to ask how many colleagues are involved in the group at NatFed. So that's the EDI group that you have at NatFed.
Yeah, I mean, what I should probably say is actually when I started, we did have a diversity and inclusion group, but it was a group of half a dozen people who'd been invited to help. And actually, once I started chatting with colleagues, there was a sort of sense of other colleagues not necessarily knowing about the group or knowing how people had ended up on the group or what the group was doing. So we just decided to kind of open it up, very positively saying to the people who were on the group that they were very welcome to continue on the group, but to invite other colleagues in. And it now includes about a third of our staff. Now, not everybody participates in every meeting, but we've just tried to keep it as open as possible and as inclusive as possible. And it's a really good forum for challenge and creative ideas. So yeah, about a third of us are involved in it, including people from the leadership team, but right through the organisation.
I think that's really important to get everybody involved in something like that as well, because that's how you learn. Because we've got a number of different groups at Network, and we're like, there's people who are involved as allies, and actually that's how you learn, and that's how you improve diversity, because there's a better understanding of different people's backgrounds and cultures, ethnicity, etc. So it's really important. Somebody else had asked what the name of the recruitment rule was, and it has been answered. So we know it's the Rooney Rule, but I thought it might be useful to explain a little bit about what the Rooney Rule is.
Yeah, so the Rooney Rule originated in the States with American football, where there was a very noticeable absence. So that there were many Black American football players, but when it came to senior management, to senior coaches, they were all white. And they realised that something was going wrong, and so they introduced something called the Rooney Rule, which is around, I'm simplifying it, but it's around making sure that if you have Black and minority ethnic candidates who meet the essential criteria, they get shortlisted, so that you have a different pool of candidates in your final shortlist. And we're doing that at the Federation now.
Good, thank you. And the next question for you was, it was a statement first saying that the target that you have is a great aspiration, and the person here is that sometimes women are reluctant to be part of panels for a variety of reasons. So what are NatFed doing to encourage more participation?
So in having diversity targets for our panels, I think firstly, we just have to be really clear that whoever we're inviting to speak isn't because of a protected characteristic. It's because they're good at what they do. They've got something interesting to bring to the debate, that they're experts in their field. And so that's always really, really clear, and we'll try to be really explicit about why we're inviting somebody. But we also offer support and training. So we've done a variety of things where we've coached people to be able to have the confidence to to speak. And if there's anybody here that ever wants to have a chat about that, more than happy to. I do think in some ways speaking in an event on screen is an easier introduction, but you then don't get, I mean, this is lovely because I can see your faces, but you don't necessarily get that audience feedback that you would get in an in-person. So there's kind of pros and cons in terms of how we're working now. But for anyone who ever has an opportunity to speak and thinks, I haven't done this before, I really, really encourage you to put yourself forward. It's really important that we're visible as women. It's really important that we're visible and on platforms. And I think as much as that's scary, you might realise quite quickly that it can also be fun and enjoyable, and you can learn a lot from being outside your comfort zone. And there's a lot of people who would be really happy to support you in practicing and rehearsing. And also, just to say, for anyone who thinks that this comes naturally, speaking at events, it doesn't. To very few people. I mean, I rehearse, I have notes, I practice, and for every single event, particularly this one because my tech didn't work to begin with, but for every single event I get nervous, and I think that's just completely normal. So I think it's also just being aware that you know, a bit of nerves is completely healthy and normal, and that we all experience it.
And I think it's a good point that using like this kind of platform for practicing speaking in public is really, really useful, because I know I personally myself have been doing it a lot more over the last year because of the lockdown, and have been putting myself forward for opportunities to speak at different events that I wouldn't normally do, because likewise I get really nervous before those kind of events. And it's a really good way of just practicing, getting yourself more comfortable with it. So I would definitely encourage doing that as well. I've had another couple of questions come through. So someone asked, Aileen, what training providers are you using to train colleagues?
So we are using people with lived experience. That's for, so we're using Limbert Spencer to do our work around white privilege. I can't remember the name of the trainer we're using around challenge, the language for challenge, but I will get that and get that out to you. But for me, it's really important to have that lived experience in the room with us, and so we are deliberately seeking people who probably might not necessarily feature on the long lists of training providers, because what we want to do is to try and find that real lived experience. And actually, if you ask in your organisations, people will know. So our Limbert, for example, one of our board members who is from a Black and minority ethnic background, and we're just using we're just going out to recruit new board members, and we'll practice diversity and ensure that we get a diverse range of candidates in that board recruitment too, because I think that's really, really important. Boards need to show leadership, and to do that, they need that lived experience as part of what they're doing. But the recommendation came from one of our board members for Limbert. As I say, I can't remember the details of the trainings, but I can share them with the people if they want to catch me afterwards. But for me, then it is that the one criteria is about lived experience and making sure that we have that training and insight coming from a very personal perspective.
Thanks, Aileen. Someone else has asked, can the Rooney Rule be applied to any role as a policy statement, or does it need to be a case-by-case basis and be justified? So that isn't to anyone in particular, so I'm open to anyone who'd like to jump in.
I don't see why it shouldn't be applied to everything.
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly not an HR people specialist, but I think it can be applied to different roles across organisations. I think we started with senior roles and are trying to expand it where we had the biggest gap, the least diversity, but we're trying to kind of expand it across the piece. And
I think Maria Bethan's done a really good response in there about how it's most successful when included as part of a wider approach to recruitment, which I think is a really good point, because like all of these things, anything in isolation isn't really going to create that environment of belonging and feeling comfortable. So yeah, that makes sense.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions? I don't think I have anything else come through. Does anybody have any other questions or any other comments that you want to make before we wrap up? I think there's a few links as well in the chat to, because I know that Kate has posted a few links in there, and there's a link to a webinar in there as well. So do go back over the chat and just click on all the links that you've come across that you think would be useful as well, and have a read of all of those. And unless there's no other questions, I'll just wrap up just by thanking everybody. I think, Tracy, were you trying to come in?
I was just going to say that I've put the link in for our next Wish National event, which is another D&I event, which is specifically focused on mentoring. And I think, coming back to what Aileen was saying about belonging, if we can get mentors to help us see ourselves and truly see ourselves and our uniqueness, then we challenge that sort of vision of what a leader looks like and all those things. So that's our next event, and that's been held, I think, by the Northwest.
Brilliant, thank you, Tracy. And someone has as well asked in the chat if we could send out the links in a follow-up email. So yeah, we'll try and do that as well. So just to wrap up, I just want to firstly thank Shelley, who has now had to leave us because she's had to go to collect her daughter from nursery, and to thank Winkworth for sponsoring our event. Thank you obviously to all of our amazing panelists for taking the time out of your busy calendars to come and join us today. Thank you to my co-host Tony, who has worked so hard to put this event together. And thank you to all of you for attending and participating in this really interesting discussion. I think for me, as an Irish woman growing up in a country that is not diverse, well, was not diverse then and is not really very diverse right now, the one thing that I've always loved about living in London is the diversity. So diversity and inclusion is something that we should all celebrate. And I think the one thing that we want you to take away from the session today is to start thinking, what can I do? So what can you do as an individual? What difference can you make? And thank you all very much again.
I'm just going to take everyone's picture. So if you're happy for me to take a picture of the screen, if you just want to smile at the screen, if you're not happy, you can turn your video off, but that's good. I'll just quickly take a snap of you all. Lovely. And do follow us on LinkedIn, follow the Wish GB, follow Wish London, and talk about this event, because that's what's really important, that we talk about it. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming
Bye.
and contributing.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
See you soon. Bye-bye.